Mike Reynolds, you served in both the Army and the Marines. What years did you serve in these different branches of service?
Well, I joined the Marines directly out of high school in 1990, and I was in the Marine Corps from 1990 through the fall of 1995. And once I left service, I went home. I worked in the civilian sector for a little while. In 1998, I joined the Arkansas Army National Guard, originally as a drilling weekend soldier. In 1999, we mobilized a unit out of Batesville, Arkansas, Bravo Company, 2nd of the 153rd Infantry. We mobilized that unit, and we took that unit to Kuwait in support of Operation Southern Watch and Operation Desert Spring. We deployed to guard the Patriot missile sites that were at the time being used to enforce the no-fly zone
Over Iraq.
Iraq.
So let me back up. So you joined the Marines just in time for the Gulf War.
Yes, sir.
Then.
Yes, sir.
And did you deploy as part of that operation?
My unit that I was assigned to deployed, although I particularly did not. I was still involved in my training process.
Okay.
I actually got in the theater shortly after the cessation of hostilities was declared. Of course, there were still some things going on there, but it wasn't, really overwhelming ground combat going on at that point in the game.
Yeah.
It was mostly just mopping things up.
Okay.
Stayed there for midsummer, midsummer of 1991 to early fall of 1991, then returned to the United States. I was stationed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina.
Okay. When you deployed for that, in the immediate aftermath of the Gulf War, was it to Kuwait, or did you go into Iraq itself?
No, we were solely in Kuwait. Solely around Kuwait City was mostly where we were at. I don't know that when I got there that there were still very many troops in Iraq proper at that point.
Not many.
They had made a couple of incursions and withdrawn, basically, to secure the Kuwaiti border, and that was
There's after the rapid defeat of the Iraqi army in the Gulf War, there was some talk at the time. Now you're a pretty young guy at this time, maybe not paying attention to the news a lot. But there was some talk at the time about, look, we're here, this Saddam Hussein guy's trouble. Let's just keep going to Baghdad and take him out. Do you remember hearing any of that stuff when you were?
There was in the Marines, and probably a more nautical term, but what we called scuttlebutt. There was scuttlebutt that we should keep doing it, and I think that it's pursue the ultimate goal would have been to remove Saddam from power.
Yeah.
That wasn't on the battle plans at that point in time, I don't believe. Now there were probably some options that he could have exercised in his war strategy that would have forced that, the United States and the coalition to go ahead and do that. But at that point in time, I believe they wanted to keep things limited and not involve us in something that would bog down into a long-term commitment, similar to what we got later on.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, I mean, you because you actually do go into Iraq later on when the U.S. goes back.
That is correct, and that's just one of those things that if hindsight is usually 20/20, and I would think that every military commander would think that. I never had a command, so that would be above my purview to talk on it. But the reality from a troop on the ground standpoint, which I was, a young soldier or a young Marine, barely 19 years old, I would have thought that it would have made more sense. But then
just to go in at the time,
just to go in and do what you needed to do immediately. And I think there are people who would look back across history, if you thought about the way we ended World War II, could we have gone ahead and negotiated some other kind of deal or forced another deal on the Russians, avoided a Cold War? Could we have driven on through, to China, through North Korea? Could we have forced a concession, or could we have, accomplished something that still needs to be accomplished to this day? We avoided dictatorship.
Yeah.
And those are probably historically, if you look at any modern military operation, you would say that that's, been the case every time.
Yeah.
And does it create, problems for you later on? Maybe so. The French might say that about Indochina. There's other people that, the British have said the same about South Africa at the time, that they were fighting there in the Boer War, so. The what ifs are always there.
Sure.
And you think about them, especially as you get older. Well, what if we had done this? What if we had done that?
What if we'd taken out Saddam? And
could we have avoided
90? Then we could have avoided. Could we? Or what other?
And
what other new problems would have been created as a result? So.
and understand that most of my experience and career in fighting in the military or being involved in wars or war planning has always been centralized on the Middle East.
Yeah.
And what happens when you take a warlord out of a society that is predicated on having a warlord in charge, and another one comes to power.
Yeah.
Do you have the opportunity to shape that? Yeah, you probably do. You probably have a lot of opportunity to shape it with economics and support or sanctions and probably political political leveraging. You could do something like that, but I think you're always going to have that in that type of situation.
Sure.
It rings true no matter what you look at it that we've been involved in my course of my military career. So if you go from 1990 to 2014, every place that we were had some type of oppressive leadership.
Sure. Yeah.
Whether it was there or whether it was in other places in the world, you had that oppressive leadership, and we go in there as a pillar of democracy, and we try to make what's our way of life fit their way of life, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. When you were in Kuwait, did you have much interaction with the Kuwaiti people?
The first time I was in Kuwait, no, I did not. We did not have a lot of interaction, and a lot of them had fled. They fled as the situation turned bad.
Their country had been invaded by Iraq,
and they were on their way out. And you have to remember that Kuwait in itself, there's a lot of people there. I don't know how many millions of people are there, but the actual citizenry, the group of people who are actual Kuwaiti citizens, is relatively small. You have a large third country national presence there. You may have service workers from other places. And,
Philippines, for example.
The Philippines, exactly. The Philippines is a large contributor to the workforce there, because the Kuwaiti people, by and large, as long as they have a job of some type, at the time they would receive a benefit from the government, a share of the oil money or whatever from the government. They had an opportunity to do other things and be out of the country and live out of the country for certain periods of time. And not saying there were no Kuwaiti citizens there, because there were, and they were oppressed quickly by Saddam and his group of thugs, but the bulk of the population in Kuwait that I observed was third country nationals.
I see. So when you went back, then you go into the Arkansas National Guard,
Right.
Then you deploy to Iraq again. Is that right? In
the first
1999,
deployment we went in 1999. We went to Kuwait. And we were there to enforce the no-fly zone. Now, that time we had some interaction with the Kuwaiti military and the Kuwaiti citizenry to some degree. They were government ministers, that were there in the base that we were stationed on.
Right.
And we interacted with those people. And from what I saw, most of the Kuwaitis that I met, they were not really different from us. I mean, if you think about how we live in the United States, what their standard of living is, what their expectations are about certain things in the world. Obviously, there were religious differences, and those are going to be evident no matter where you go, pretty quickly, because that's part of your country training, to respect their religious culture. But if you were to meet them outwardly, other than dressing a little differently, I didn't really find them to be completely different than anybody you would meet here in the United States.
Yeah.
So.
Now so it's Kuwait when you went in the early 90s with the Marines, and you went back to Kuwait in 1999 with the Arkansas National Guard. And that, as you were saying at the beginning, what happens is, Saddam Hussein is waging war against the Kurds in the north, and then I think you've got an uprising in the south, and so the U.S. and other allies are enforcing a no-fly zone, right?
That's correct.
Saddam Hussein is not allowed to use his air force over the north and the southern part of Iraq. And so that was part of your mission?
That was our mission.
Or you were part of that mission?
Yes, we were part of that mission. And what we had, where we were stationed at Al Jaber Air Station, which is, couldn't give you the exact geographic location in Kuwait. The United States used it all the way up through the end of hostilities there with Iraq in the last part of the war, this last war that we were involved in. But that location had Patriot air defense artillery there. Patriot missiles were made to shoot down Scuds and other aircraft, and our job was to make sure that those launch sites were protected. We were the physical security presence there.
Yeah.
And then we lived on a base with American pilots, obviously Air Force contingents. That guys were flying the no-fly zone all the time, that were enforcing the actual pieces of the treaty that said you can't fly here, you can't fly there.
When you were there for that part, what was that operation called?
Operation Southern Watch.
Operation Southern Watch. Mm-hmm. When you were there, did you kind of have a feeling that I mean, did you have a sense that this Saddam Hussein guy kind of hadn't learned his lesson in 1990?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
and I think it's evident by the fact that we had to enforce a no-fly zone, and we tell you don't fly here, you're going to try it anyway. And
did he?
He did. I don't know that he ever did while we were there. There were never any shooting incidents that I'm aware of.
Okay.
There could have been, and I didn't know about it. There could have been a close one, and I didn't know about it.
Yeah.
But the reality is, yes, he did, dare us. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do?
Yeah.
He's a bully in the neighborhood.
Yeah,
and
no question.
obviously we don't always want to resort to physical violence to deal with a bully, but in the case of someone such as that, that's almost the only thing they understand. And we in the United States, we see things way differently than other places in the world, and I'm sure in your interaction with students from other places, you understand what they realize is a tragedy is not what we realize is a tragedy. We think maybe 10 or 15 people get hurt or killed in an incident, and that's a major incident, and to them that it's not a dent in the bucket. They're not interested in anything that 1,000 people, 1,500 people. Those people are they starve or they're killed in because of the poor sanitary conditions after a natural disaster. I mean, there's so many things outside the United States, that don't fit into our thinking.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things I believe that does it. So if Saddam kills 10,000 of his own people, they don't even really know about it because it doesn't affect them on a daily basis. So they really have no concern for it.
Yeah.
Or they may be of a different religious sect and they don't even, those people to mean anything to them. That's just part of understanding the culture of that place.
Just that rough world. When you were in Kuwait in the late 90s, what I was getting at with or what I was thinking about getting at with the question about did you have interactions with Kuwaitis, in either time you were there, did you have a feeling in whatever you picked up in the country, did you have a feeling that the people there were grateful for what the United States had done in 1990?
I believe the Kuwaiti people were very grateful for what we did for them, and I think we've always maintained a fairly good relationship with Kuwait throughout its history. That a lot of that area was a British empire, or they were somebody else's empire at some point in time, and there were pieces of those interactions that carry through even to this day. The Kuwaitis were more interested in being productive members of society, not furthering anything. They were more secular. That would be the easiest way to describe it. I would say that they were more secular than what you would find in Saudi Arabia or Iraq and obviously Iran and some other places. They had a sense of purpose about them that wasn't completely about just their small country or just their small kingdom. It was more, where do we fit in the global economy? Where do we fit into global politics? And we want to be respected as a global political power and as a global economic power. And I think that was the difference in what I saw in other countries, especially in Iraq later on. Being stationed there for any amount of time, you just did not see that. They were not interested in being part of the greater global culture. They were more interested in day-to-day living. I want electricity, and I'm going to climb that pole out there, and I'm going to send my kid up that pole with, to hang a wire across it, and how I get it's irrelevant, and who's paying for it's irrelevant as long as I have it. The Kuwaitis didn't act that way. They were more, if I had to say it without being too harsh, I would say they were more civilized and more civil to one another.
Well,
you don't see that.
People understand what you mean. So let's move toward when you do actually get into Iraq itself. You're in the Guard when 9/11 goes down. So
that's right.
Tell me about your 9/11.
9/11 experience was something that was just, it was abrupt. It's a change that's about to be forced upon you, whether you want it or not. And of course, like many Americans, I sat on the, I at the time I was working with an ROTC detachment at East Arkansas Community College as part of my job. As a training in NCO in the Arkansas National Guard. Yeah. And so I had done my class that morning. We'd had PT with our physical fitness training with our class, and we talked a little bit about some leadership things. And I had prepared myself to go home or go to the Armory to do my normal day's duty. And along the way, I had stopped and got gas, and it was just crazy. The people were just glued to a television set in a gas station, small town, Colt, Arkansas. And this little Exxon station, I walk in, and what's everybody? Somebody go outside and move their car. I need to get fuel and go on to my job, and finish my duty day. And they start immediately talking about this is shortly after 8 in the morning. So the first plane had already crashed, and I didn't see that. And I thought, well, okay, I've got enough gas to get to work. This is going to be a national emergency. So I got back in my truck and drove the rest of the way from where I was to Wynne, Arkansas, to the armory that I worked at. And I walked in the office, front door of the office, and the first thing I noticed was the door was locked. It's normal duty hours. I had to use my key to get in, and we're already starting to, we haven't been ordered to make any preparations, but we're all soldiers. We know what's going on.
Well, this is what I want to stop you here, because when 9/11 went down, other than just wondering what's going on, but then my thought is, so what are they going to do, meaning the government? Right. I'm guessing since you're wearing the uniform, your question isn't what are they going to do, the question is what am I going to do? When are we going to do it? When are we going to do it? Yeah.
And that answer came fairly quickly. I would say that it was within 4 or 5 days. There were some response plans being played out in the general operational part of the military, and of course I'm sure there was a response plan in place immediately. It was just a file. We go to this file, this what if scenario, and this, okay, so here's the what if, what do we do next? No fly zone over the United States. Obviously that was something that happened really quickly.
Yeah.
We saw that we scrambled aircraft as soon as we knew that there was a threat, and then unfortunately we scrambled some of those aircraft and they were unarmed. So but we had a response, and we implemented it quickly. For us on the ground, we immediately started fielding calls from our unit members. When are we going?
Yeah.
And didn't know that information. We can only say, hey, the only information we have right now is that this has happened and the threat con is this, and we're going to continue to keep you abreast of what's going on. Well, of course, within 5 or 6 days, we had a mobilization plan that was beginning, and we started to implement that plan, getting guys on orders and getting things ready to deploy, learning where our MOB station was going to be,
what's MOB?
Mobilization station. Whenever you have a large group of National Guardsmen, they'll take them to one Army post and basically process them into active duty service. I mean, you've got a lot of guys that maybe not going to the dentist like they're supposed to, or not, getting the health care that they're supposed to get. So you've got to get them ready to go, be inducted into regular Army service.
And were you were active duty?
I was already active duty at the time, and that was part of my job, was inducting, getting those guys taken care of. I say inducted, but really just moving them from a different status of federal, military service to active duty service, the active duty side of things.
Yeah.
So we got them, in the MOB station, and we start, sorting through the people we've got. We've got guys that are, getting too old to go overseas. The National Guard's got some older folks in it, and then we've got guys that have not completed their training yet. So we know they're not going to deploy. They're going to have to go somewhere and complete their training, and it's probably going to get advanced. And then, with the reserves and National Guard, you even have some kids who are doing that while they're still in high school. So they still have a year of school left to go. So you've got to get all these people accounted for, determine what your actual strength of your unit is, and then start, then working them into a plan that allows them to be trained and equipped to then go to the overseas. So that starts at a mobilization station, and then you go from there through their training. And our training lasted from October, November, and December, and then we actually deployed to Egypt in January of 2002. So we were there for the Multinational Force and Observers. The MFO has been in place since the end of the last war between Egypt and Israel. So.
Okay, so that was part of an ongoing...
That was part of an ongoing operation. And it's just a United States security company, or battalion, that's there, so it's a battalion of infantry that's assigned to it. And we were the first National Guard unit to do that. We had no other National Guard unit had done that. And we trained for, which was normally a 6-month train up, or maybe even longer in certain circumstances. We accomplished that in short order.
And was the purpose of that to relieve the active duty Army guys and let them...
What we were doing was taking a mission that was, in all senses, less dangerous. I mean, this was the Middle East, and 9/11 had happened, so it was very precarious in many places at that point in time.
Yeah.
But that relieved the regular Army units so that they could then deploy to Afghanistan, or deploy within the needs of what the Army was doing as a whole.
Yeah, that's right.
As we were developing the situation to allow us to the initial stages of the war on terrorism.
Right.
So
now you get to Iraq itself in 2004.
2004.
Right? So between 2001, 2004, you're in Egypt. You're getting these guys processed from.
Right. We left
You
from
know,
Egypt in July, and we got everybody home and demobilized and off orders. It was probably around October of that year, and so we went back to normal 1 weekend a month training for the guys that were coming in and out. And of course, there were immediately rumors and that later proved to be true that we were going to get another mission in the near future. Obviously, the invasion of Iraq occurred in 2003. We were on the heels of that operation.
Yeah.
We rotated into country in the late 2003. We had our first group of guys there. We were pretty much completely in country with Arkansas's 39th Infantry Brigade. By the spring of that year, we were part of the 1st Cavalry Division from Fort Hood, Texas. We were one of their ground combat elements.
Yeah.
And so we took our entire 39th Infantry Brigade over there, and some of our units that were comprised our brigade were from out of state. We had some Pennsylvania soldiers. We had some New York soldiers. We had some soldiers. We had one battalion from Washington and Oregon. So we were a composite of National Guard units that were assigned to the 1st Cavalry Division as one of their combat brigades.
When did you get to Iraq? It's so 2004.
Right.
Early 2004. Later.
I met my unit in theater in September, October timeframe, and then I was there until April of 2005. So, and that's when the unit came home. And there were certain, when you're in the National Guard, you can only do so many days of deployed service. So what we did was, some of the guys that had deployed to the Egypt mission in 2001, they could either stay in Iraq until their days ended, their number of days that they could do overseas ended, and then be rotated home, or we stayed at home and picked up where the guys that were rotating out left. So we split our forces to some degree, and that allowed us to keep a fully manned unit overseas for the entire time we were required to be there.
What was your job in Iraq?
I was an infantry squad leader. I was in charge of an infantry squad and later a platoon of infantry soldiers, and I was actively involved with the employment of our reconnaissance and sniper elements into the city of Baghdad. And what we were doing were patrols to, obviously we're trying to win hearts and minds. We're doing civic projects, but those civic projects have to be guarded by infantry people, or cavalry people, as it were. And so we were infantry support for those kind of operations. We did patrols to, secure neighborhoods, or to secure, transportation routes or logistics routes. We did, we escorted some VIPs. We did door-to-door searches. We did counter IED work. We searched for IEDs. We searched for weapons caches. That's correct. Improvised explosive devices. So we did all those kind of things, and that was a shooting war. I wasn't saying that it was a World War II-ish, shooting war, but it was a shooting war, and we had casualties. We took casualties within the 39th Infantry Brigade and within the Arkansas National Guard. We had, soldiers killed in action. So it wasn't, it wasn't a cakewalk, but it wasn't bad as it could be, I suppose. It wasn't a Vietnam-style war, but it was still. I mean, you spend a lot of time on the street, and it's really hard to determine who the enemy is.
Well, I was going to ask you, it's obviously different from Vietnam, but I think one similarity is you can't know who the enemy is.
That is correct,
right.
And it's still guerrilla warfare. Maybe not from our standpoint. We're not, participating in. We're not using guerrilla tactics, but we're having guerrilla tactics used against us. So, the ambush is you drive down the street and that bag of garbage, and that was everywhere in Baghdad. You didn't know if that was an improvised explosive device. If you saw a new asphalt patch on the road, you didn't know if somebody had hit a bomb in it, or even a dead animal on the side of the road, or a burnout car could be rigged with explosives so that when you drove by it or you walked by it detonated and produced casualties. And that is indicative of guerrilla tactics. That's a terror campaign.
And I imagine you were out on some convoys that hit IEDs?
Yes, we were engaged. We were engaged with IEDs and small arms fire on many occasions, actually, more than I probably think about anymore. But yes, that had happened. And as a leader, you have to be willing to accept what's coming at you, and and think on your feet and do what you have to do to.
Was there kind of a typical pattern, sort of IED followed by small arms? Was there a particular pattern that kind of worked itself out?
Sometimes
or?
there was, and sometimes there wasn't. I mean, you could, an IED could be, targeted at a specific group of people, or it could be over there with a fuse that was dependent on ice melting in a bucket, to make a connection. And, there's no real rhyme or reason to that, because ice melts at different rates, and as far as, triggering an explosive, or it could be somebody with a cell phone. So there were some patterns that you would see, but I would say that the pattern by and large was the lack of a pattern. And that is what makes it difficult when you're, oh, we've got this person of interest, we're going to go try to find him. And oh, by the way, he's really important to this particular group of people in Baghdad, and they may try to protect him in this manner. It makes it difficult when you're not looking at another uniform, especially when you come up like I did in a military that was still focused on the Cold War. We were expecting the communists to be who we were fighting, or we were expecting, this particular uniform and this order of battle, where you had tanks and infantry and engineers, and you don't have that with the war in Iraq, and not much in the war in Afghanistan. It was just a matter of hit and run tactics, and it's the biggest factor that you'll see. If I had to talk to every one of my guys, was that, we didn't want those people to be scared of us, but in order for us to make any gains that would meaningful, they had to be more scared of us than they were of their own people. And as a doctrine, that just didn't fit, it didn't fit into the way.
It's hard to win hearts and minds.
That's right.
When you also need to be tougher than the
people than the thugs,
than the insurgent.
That's right, than the insurgents. And I wouldn't say that every Iraqi hated us, or that every, they weren't unwilling for us to support them.
Yeah.
But I think they have been beaten down by years and years and years of a repressive regime, that used basically thug tactics on their own people to coerce them to do things.
Sure.
All right, so we're going to walk in there and we're going to take away that. Now there's a power vacuum, and we're not going to coerce you. Well, there's going to be somebody who coerces you, and they're going to come in and do it. And that's the whole thing in a nutshell right there, is we have got to. They don't have the same thought capacity that we do for what is good and what is right and what is wrong and what is bad. So that's where we have to differ our tactics, and where we have to move away from trying to Americanize everything. Not everybody wants to be an American. I'm not saying that that's a good or a bad thing. I don't fault them for it. They just don't have the capacity to understand what it is.
Sure, it's not in their experience.
This is a new experiment. I mean, yes, it's 200 plus years old at this point in the game, but it is still relatively a new experiment.
Sure.
The way of the law of the land in the Middle East and many other places in the country has been that, it's been that way for 1,000 years. That's a lot of impetus to overcome.
Sure.
It's a lot of inertia to overcome.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is what we have failed to see as a military force, and even at the level of generals and politicians who are, war is merely an extension of politics. As a history, you understand that, and we have missed that lesson, that our politics don't necessarily translate to those of another country.
You were there. I mean, as you'll remember, the forces get to Baghdad really quick. The government in Baghdad falls really quick. The statue comes down. The announcement is made, with the banner in the background, mission accomplished. But by the time you get there, I mean, you're there at a tough time when the IEDs are going off.
The insurgency has started at that point in time.
Yeah.
And, if getting to Baghdad quickly was like getting to Berlin quickly, you're going to bypass certain things. And we bypassed a lot of combatant elements. Either they fled or became, basically dissolved into the not the jungle, but dissolved into the desert. Yeah. And then, you bypass that stuff, it's all well and good, but it'll eventually come back to haunt you. And I think that's what we were harvesting that fruit when we about 2004, 2005, you saw the operations in Fallujah. And I think that sometimes we have a tendency to do this, whether it's in business or in the military. We declare victory way too quickly. Mm-hmm. We make gains and we do things that are important, and we have these small victories, and we all of a sudden think the battle's over. And we made that, that was short-sighted on our part as a country or as a military. And I think that was proved out by the fact that, now in their current presidential administrations, finally getting some of the, most of the people are out of the country, but it took years. And it was because we spent so much time bypassing and looking in different areas for what we really needed to accomplish.
Yeah.
We haven't been successful with that theory. We weren't successful with it in Korea. We weren't successful with it in Vietnam. We weren't successful with it in Desert Storm the first time. We haven't been successful with that. One thing that is glaringly missing from anything you see the military do these days, when was the last time you saw an American flag raised over somebody else's capital? We don't do it. I mean, it's, we're not trying to be a ruler. We're not trying to be another oppressor. We're trying to give you your country back.
Yeah.
But then we have to, it was successful. We did a good job with it with Germany. And we did a good job with it to a degree with Japan. I mean, look at the culture that they have in place and where they are socially and economically in the world today. We didn't impart our views on them, but we did let them know you had been beaten. And that is something we haven't done since then. We haven't beaten somebody like that, and I don't think it exists in America's culture to be that way anymore. And it may become necessary. It may become necessary in a future war. We don't go 10, 15 years at the most without having a war that the United States is involved in, some kind of skirmish, some kind of operation, whether you talk about, all the way back into the, so we had the Civil War, but not long after that we were involved in things that were going on in Mexico. We were involved in things, different other, the Philippines, and then we had the Boxer Rebellion, and then we had World War I, and in between World War I and World War II, we had all the banana wars down in South America that the Marines were involved in, and certain Army forces. Then we get to World War II, and then World War II's over, and 10 years later we're in Korea, and Korea's over, and 10 years later we're in Vietnam, and Vietnam's over, and 10 years later where are we? 10 or 15 years later. So it's, it's a pattern of behavior, for us as a country to do that. But the pattern was broken as far as how much effort we put into beating somebody. And of course we don't think that that's okay anymore as a society. Maybe we're softer than the World War II generation, but it's also reflective of American culture in general. It's things that we have evolved past the need to beat somebody down on the playground. What have we established? What have we established? But what we also have to understand is our culture doesn't fit every piece of the puzzle. It's not a universal fit anywhere. And that's something that I hope that in the future, we'll understand.
What was your impression of Iraq? You're there for these months from the fall of 2004 to the, what'd you say, the spring of the
2005.
The spring or summer of 2005. You have all these experiences, the improvised explosive devices, the firefights, the casualties, etc. When you got to the end of that deployment, did you have any sense that this is a country that can get on its feet, or what was your feeling just about the state of that country?
Understand that I spent the bulk of my time in really bad neighborhoods. I'm talking about the worst poverty you can imagine. People that, like I alluded to earlier, they'll climb a light pole and hang a wire on a high tension line just so they can brew a cup of coffee or a pot of tea. They probably had very little understanding of what was happening outside of that 2 square miles that they inhabited. And really had very little care in what was happening outside of that, because they were so focused on making it day to day, feeding their families, avoiding harm. They were avoiding pain and trying to keep their belly full. And because we took away all the structure that was there. I mean, even if it was a bad structure, we took all that away.
You mean the structure of the
Hussein regime? You went from one extreme to another, and those people were kind of caught in a middle ground there where they didn't really know how to act. They didn't understand. Okay, so you gave us the right to vote, but what does that mean? What are we voting for? What does it mean to pick your own people? Because that entire concept was not. That was just completely. It was like teaching them to speak French. In 2 weeks. It's not. Maybe some are going to get it. Most of them are not. So I would say that my impression of the general status of the people there was that I don't think we really made a difference. We changed it from one bad scenario to another bad scenario. not that what we were trying to do was good, but we had very good intentions. But you know, the best of intentions don't always make the best of results.
In the course of that deployment, you know, you're trying to track down insurgent leaders, you know, all the different missions that you're on. Did you feel like you were making any progress? Or
we made progress. If you look at a report card and say, did we get A, B, and C people? Yes, we got them. We found them. We rooted them out, and we took them into custody. And either, you know, I don't know what happened to them after we got them. Some of them, I'm sure, were released back into society, or maybe they went to prison, or whatever the case was. They may be rehabilitated, re-indoctrinated, whatever the case were. And so we made you know, successes. There were successes. There were small victories. There were big victories. You know, and getting home alive with most of your people is probably the biggest victory. But as far as long-term impact, I don't know that we really made a long-term impact on them, and I don't know that we could have if we'd have stayed another 10 years, because again, our culture, our ideals, don't necessarily fit their culture and their ideals, and so that makes it difficult.
Yeah.
It's like we're all working towards the same goal, but we don't understand what a team is.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, we train the Iraqis to do their, you know, to take care of themselves, but then they're susceptible to the next warlord that comes along saying, you're going to do this for me, because if you don't, I'm going to kill your family. Not because I'm going to write you a paycheck, but because I'm going to kill your family, you know?
Yeah.
So they switch sides, and they switch loyalties, you know, like you may switch shoes and socks over the course of a week.
Yeah.
And I don't really think that you make long-term progress with that.
Yeah.
From my standpoint. Now, from a you know, that's not obviously not the Army standpoint, and it may not even be a popular thing to say within the Army, but I just don't believe that I wasted my time over there, because I experienced something that was critical to my development as a person, as a human being.
What would that be?
Yeah.
What big things did you learn?
You learn resiliency. You learn to weigh the decisions you make versus the outcomes you expect, and you learn to temper your expectancies. You know, what do you expect to happen here, and what's realistically going to happen here. And that doesn't just fit. If I kick down that door over there, there's a bad guy waiting on me on the other side, or there's a bad guy waiting for my guy on the other side. You make decisions quickly, and you try to make them accurately with all the information you have, but you never have all the information. So you learn to be resilient. You learn to face your mistakes. Some days you're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And some days those mistakes are going to cause people to get hurt. And if you dwell on that, you're destroying yourself. You have to be able to move past the things that don't go well in your life and move on to the next chapter.
Yeah.
If you constantly look in the rearview mirror, you never get anywhere. You know, so from a leader standpoint, I would say that was the thing that I learned. The biggest thing was to be resilient and understand that all decisions, you know, come with consequences. It's like every blessing you ever get will come with a burden. You may not see that burden.
Sure.
And just like every time you ask for something, a legitimate answer is no. You know, that's
Sure.
So you be resilient to those things, and you move past them. Be realistic in your expectations.
Yeah. You have you're in Iraq at a tense time, and you're doing work that's tough. You're out in these tough neighborhoods, and you got the bad guys and the insurgents around. You don't know who you can trust. Then you come back to the States. How long did it take you to kind of, relax, relax, or just kind of settle in again to life here, or has that still not happened?
You know, some parts of it still haven't. I still eyeball that bag of trash on the side of the road. I still look at an overpass, what's on top of it when I go under it. And it's distracting sometimes. It's not as bad as it used to be, but I think it'll always be there. So, you know, I still don't like to be in huge crowds. It makes me, you know, nervous when I can't see everybody's hands. You know, those things I said, you know, and some of that stuff, maybe it's not directly related to what I experienced there, but a lot of those things are. I would say, you know, for the loud noises, that kind of reintegration, it took, I don't know, 6 months or a year, and then gradually everything else kind of falls away. And you just don't think about it all the time. And for me, everybody deals with that differently. For me, I don't spend a lot of time watching war movies. It just doesn't, you know. Now I can watch, you know, a newer representation of a World War II movie. That's okay, but I don't spend a lot of time watching the modern takes on on combat operations, and I don't play video games that deal with it. You know, I've got a
Yeah.
lot of friends who that's their outlet. You know, they go and they play Call of Duty or whatever, and that helps them, you know, assuage those problems that they have. And so
But
for me, I say 6 months or a year, I was mostly normal. But there's things that I do that are probably somebody else might say are still. And why do you do that? You know,
Still,
it's just part of it. You know, it was a learned behavior, and it was probably a self-protective behavior. So
yeah.
when you do things to protect yourself, then you know, by extension, they don't always go away easily.
Yeah.
Hard-learned lessons.
Yeah.
You know.
Is there a particular memory you have, without, you know, digging up anything that, you know, you don't want to talk about, but I mean, is there a particular experience you had in Iraq that, you know, of all the experiences, I mean, and I imagine in that kind of situation, you're packing, you know, as much life into 2 days as a lot of people are going to have in years, but is there a particular experience you had that really stands out in your mind?
We escorted a convoy of munitions to from Baghdad, from our base there in Baghdad. It was stuff that had been confiscated. It was old,
like insurgent weapons.
And mostly explosives.
Yeah.
And so this convoy took probably 6 or 8 hours, and there were 8 gun trucks and 15, 20, maybe 30 semi trucks. You know, various loads of obvious explosives packed on the back of the trucks.
Wow.
And that was 6 hours of the most nerve-wracking, trying to watch everything that happened.
Oh, because
every angle, because we just expected that somebody was either going to try to ambush us and detonate that stuff, or ambush us and steal that stuff to use it again. You know, and so it was just every time you saw a car coming at you, or a car coming up from behind you, or coming from an intersection towards you, it was just a nerve-wracking experience. And that was one of those days where you live it, and you get through with it, and you think, I'm going to get home, I'm going to get back to my quarters, and I'm going to take a rest, and I'm going to get something to eat, and I'm going to wash it away in the shower, or whatever the case is, and it just doesn't go away. You know, it's just one of those things that the adrenaline and the tension just don't go away, and it lasted for 2 or 3 days. There were other things that were intense. Don't get me wrong. There were situations that were very intense, but that particular thing sticks in my mind as being just nerves frayed for a 10, 12-hour period where you're living on pins and needles.
Because if you hit an IED, the implications.
That's right. Everything is, we're not right where we can get immediate support. It may take a medevac, 20 minutes to get here by air, and of course we're being tracked, and we're in radio communications with everybody, and we've got air cover, here and there, but it's still one of those situations where it's very nerve-wracking, and it's just, and it wasn't many days past that we were doing a patrol in a sector of Baghdad, and we took some sporadic small arms fire from the top of a building, and my gunner in my truck sat down, and he said, "Hey, Sergeant, they're shooting at us." He said, "What do I do?" I said, "Son, you stand up and shoot back. It'll be okay." And it was nonchalant, but you don't think of it that way. From your standpoint, it may not seem that way, but for us, it was just, they're shooting at us.
It almost becomes
second nature, and can you see where they're shooting from? I think so. Well, shoot back.
Yeah.
And
did you work at all with the Iraqi military?
We did. We did some joint operations with the Iraqi military, and the thing that comes to mind whenever anybody asks me about the Iraqi military, the first word out of my mouth is always incompetence. But you have to temper that with the fact that they had a short time, training, and they had very little leadership training.
Yeah.
Because a leader in the military is a threat to a dictator. So you don't have really good leadership in an army that's owned by a dictator. Obviously, in 1990 and 91, they abandoned their equipment. There was no leadership there to say, you will stay on this.
Oh, during the invasion,
As time progressed, there were units in the Iraqi military that were well trained, and they were well equipped, and they were disciplined. But by and large, those did not exist, and they still don't exist.
Well, and a lot of those guys actually end up joining the insurgency, right? A lot of that.
That's right. You see that leadership leave the Iraqi military to go to the insurgency, and they had that plan all along. They knew they were going to get overrun. They had no type of any concept that they could, or thought process that told them they could stand toe-to-toe with a coalition force.
Yeah.
Yeah. And many militaries throughout the world would have that same problem. They can't stand it. So they put those programs and pieces together to say, okay, we're going to make a fighting resistance and then we're going to become a guerrilla resistance.
Then put on the civvies and
Right, that's right.
now these Iraqi forces, you rightly say, they didn't have a whole lot of time to pull things together, and you use the word incompetent. That aside, did you feel that you could trust them? And here's what I mean. I mean, could you always be confident that this Iraqi soldier isn't actually working for the insurgency?
No, I never felt that, because the guys that I worked with were a lot of the guys were junior leaders. I mean, they weren't even leaders. They were just junior. They were Joes. They were your average, for lack of a better term, they were the cannon fodder.
Yeah.
And those guys, if somebody leaned on that guy to, we're going to kill your family if you don't do this to them. And these Americans, when they come back over here, well, yes, they're going to do again, that goes to that fear factor thing. Are you more scared of us, or are you more scared of the
So they could be gathering intelligence.
That's right. They could be gathering intelligence the whole time. Now, was every Iraqi soldier that way? No, there were lots of professional Iraqi soldiers. A lot of the really strongly professional Iraqi soldiers were some of our interpreters, male and female, and they were brave people. They were out there every day, working with Americans, and the people knew they were working for the Americans, and that there were consequences of that. Some of our interpreters were killed, they were assassinated. But there were some people, yes, that I trusted, and there was a couple of Iraqis that I would have trusted with my life. But by and large, no, I would say that element of trust was not there, and there was no reason for it to be there, in my opinion. Some others may say differently, but the Iraqis that I worked with, especially the Iraqi National Guard and the Iraqi military and Iraqi police, I would say that they went to the highest bidder.
Yeah.
That would be who could exert the most force on them.
Yeah.
It wasn't us.
What do you think? Put yourself in front of a group of American, university freshmen right now who don't even remember 9/11. They're too young to remember 9/11, and you have a minute or two to tell them what you think they should know about the American operations, either against or in Iraq. So Gulf War, early
Right.
90s, and then related to the war on terrorism of the 2000s. What do you think young people today should know about the American military efforts in relation to Iraq?
I think we went to Iraq with the right purpose, and we went into Afghanistan with the right purpose. I think it took too long to establish what we wanted, and I think it took a little too long to establish our ideas of what we wanted to accomplish when we got there. But the grand scheme of the whole maneuver was to make sure that something like 9/11 didn't happen again. And by doing things and drawing them out as long as we did, we probably set the stage for something like that to happen again, because we've made a lot of enemies in the world. Unfortunately, when you're one of the forerunning superpowers and one of the forerunning arsenals for democracy, you're going to get stones thrown at you. And our program, our experiment in democracy, our experiment in this republic that we live in, will not last if there are not young people who are willing to take the straps of the horse, or whatever you want to say, and lead and go forward and do these things again.
Yeah.
Every generation has had to deal with this, every one. And at some point in time, I feel certain that their generation will have to deal with it as well, and I hope that they're prepared for it. If we don't learn from our history, we're going to repeat it. That would be the it. That would be, maybe you haven't learned history like you should have learned it. Go out on your own, research the topic, and understand why things happen. It's not just about what you see on television sometimes. It's about the men and women who are on the ground making these commitments to their country and to other people's country to make them safe, and to ensure that our way of life lives on in perpetuity.
I hear you. Well, Mike Reynolds, thank you. I appreciate it.
I really enjoyed talking to you, Doctor. Thank you very much.